The first snow of winter fell silently over Sierra Nevada. Not the heavy blanket that would come later, but a gentle warning, a whisper of what was to come. A herd of wild Mustangs moved like flowing water across the valley floor. Their hooves barely disturbed the thin layer of white, leaving ephemeral patterns that disappeared almost as quickly as they formed. At the invisible line where the Federal Reserve met protected land, the lead mare paused. Her nostrils flared, testing the air. Something was different. Among the herd trotted a 5-month-old colt, his coat mostly white with ash-gray patches splashed across his back like shadows. Unlike the others who kept their attention forward, the young horse frequently turned his head, scanning their surroundings with an alertness unusual for his age. The lead mare Aurora nickered softly. The herd moved again, but more cautiously now. They had been forced to change their migration pattern this year. The old paths were blocked by strange new barriers that smelled of human manufacture and metal. The colt's shadow stayed close to his mother. His ears swiveled constantly, picking up sounds too faint for the others. He could sense it, the wrongness that had been growing in their territory. A darkness spreading like infection through the forest they called home. Ashley Carter pulled her Forest Service truck to a stop at the observation point. She cut the engine and sat in the sudden silence, listening to the soft tick of the cooling metal. Even after 3 years, she still caught herself waiting for the sound of a second vehicle pulling up behind her Mason's truck. But Mason was gone, and the silence remained unbroken. At 32, Ashley was considered one of the most reliable rangers in the service. Her colleagues respected her precision, her adherence to protocol. What they didn't see was how she used those rules to wall herself off from everything else. She pulled out her radio. Carter checking in from East Ridge Observation Point. All clear so far. Beginning final patrol route before the storm. Copy that, Carter, came Director Peterson's voice. Weather Service just upgraded the advisory. Storm's accelerating. Be back by sundown. Copy. Ashley slipped the radio back onto her belt and stepped out into the crisp air. The temperature had dropped several degrees since morning. She pulled her collar higher against the wind and began her inspection of the wildlife cameras. The first 2 checkpoints were routine, but at the third, Ashley paused. The camera had been moved, its angle changed to point away from the valley and toward a thicker section of forest. She frowned and checked the memory card. The last images showed only trees and shadows, no wildlife. Someone had deliberately repositioned it. She made a note in her log and reset the camera's position. As she worked, the first real flakes of snow began to fall. Peterson's warning echoed in her mind. The storm was indeed moving faster than forecasted. She should head back soon. As Ashley turned to leave, she stopped. Something moved at the edge of the tree line. She reached instinctively for the tranquilizer gun at her hip muscles tensing, but it wasn't a predator. A young Mustang colt emerged from the trees, his white coat almost luminous against the darkening forest. He stood perfectly still, watching her, with eyes that seemed too knowing for a wild animal. "Hey there," Ashley said softly, though she kept her distance. Wild horses didn't approach humans. They fled at the first sign of their presence. Yet this colt didn't move. He simply stood his breath, creating small clouds in the cold air. Then, most strangely, he pawed at the ground 3 times with his right front hoof. He took several steps back, then stopped, looked at her, took more steps away, stopped again, and looked back. "What are you doing?" Ashley whispered. The colt repeated the behavior, walking away, stopping, looking back. Even with her years of experience with wildlife, Ashley had never seen anything like this. The behavior was deliberate, almost human. Her radio crackled. "Carter, storm's picking up. Get moving." She pulled it from her belt. "Peterson, I've got a young Mustang showing abnormal behavior, attempting to make contact." A pause. "Negative, Carter. No time for wildlife observation. Get back to base before this hits full force." Any other day, she would have followed orders without question. Protocol existed for a reason, but something about this colt's behavior triggered an instinct deeper than training. "He's trying to show me something." "That's not possible, Carter. It's a wild animal. Now get back to base." "That's an order." The colt continued his strange behavior, becoming more agitated when she didn't follow. Ashley made her decision. "Going to check it out. We'll report back." She silenced Peterson's protest by clipping the radio back to her belt. The snow was falling faster now, but she began following the colt, keeping a respectful distance. The young horse led her off the main trail deeper into the forest. The terrain gradually grew steeper as they approached the eastern ridge. With each step, the storm intensified around them. "This better be good," Ashley muttered as icy flakes stung her cheeks. After nearly 40 minutes of difficult hiking, the colt stopped at the base of a rocky incline. He pawed the ground again, more urgently this time, then began picking his way up the slope. Ashley hesitated. This was dangerous territory, especially in a worsening storm, but the colt's insistence was impossible to ignore. She began to climb, using tree roots and rock outcroppings to pull herself upward. At the top of the ridge, the wind momentarily died down, the swirling snow parting, to reveal a sight that stole Ashley's breath. A full-grown Mustang mare lay trapped on a narrow ledge. One leg was clearly broken, twisted at an unnatural angle. The horse's sides heaved with labored breathing, her once powerful body now vulnerable and failing. The colt rushed to the mare's side, nickering softly. The larger horse responded weakly, lifting her head slightly at her foal's approach. "Oh my God," Ashley whispered. She moved carefully closer, observing that the ledge itself was unstable. Part of it already crumbled away. The mare watched her with pain-filled eyes but made no attempt to rise or flee. Ashley knelt to examine the injured leg without touching it. What she saw made her blood run cold. This wasn't a natural injury from a fall. The wound showed unmistakable signs of a high-powered projectile, most likely a specialized tranquilizer dart. There were also abrasions around the mare's neck, suggesting she had been captured and somehow escaped. Even more disturbing, as Ashley looked closer, she noticed something embedded under the mare's skin, a small metallic object, a tracking chip. Someone had been hunting this mare, deliberately, illegally. Ashley reached for her radio, but before she could call in, the colt nudged her hand. His intelligent eyes moved between her and his mother, pleading for help more clearly than words could express. "I'll help her," Ashley promised, though she knew the mare's chances of survival were slim without immediate veterinary care. She pulled out her emergency kit and set to work, stabilizing the leg and clearing snow from around the injured horse. As she worked, the storm intensified, howling across the ridge with growing fury. Helen Winslow set another log in the old stone fireplace of her cabin. At 78, she knew the sound of approaching storms better than any weather service. This one would be fierce. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis but still strong, stroked the spine of a leather-bound journal, one of dozens that lined her shelves. These books contained the history of the Clearwater Valley Mustangs, documented first by her father, then by herself for over 60 years. The phone rang. No one called her landline anymore except for emergencies. "Winslow Residence," she answered. "Helen, it's Sarah Williams." The veterinarian's voice was tight with urgency. "Forest Service just called. They've got a ranger stranded on East Ridge with an injured Mustang. Storm's too severe for a full rescue team tonight." Helen moved to the window. Through the thickening snow, she could just make out the dark shape of the ridge. "Which ranger?" "Ashley Carter." Helen nodded, unsurprised. The quiet rule-following Ashley had always struck her as someone with deeper currents than others suspected. "What's the situation with the horse? Broken leg, possible other injuries. But here's the strange part. She says a foal led her there. Deliberately?" Helen's hand tightened around the phone. "What color is the foal?" "I don't know." "Why?" Helen didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to a specific journal on her shelf, one marked with the years, 2017-2024. "Have Ethan Grant meet me at my place in 30 minutes and bring his portable veterinary kit." "Helen, what's going on?" "Something the Paiute people have been waiting for." Helen's voice had taken on a strange resonance. The return of the White Soul Guardians. The snow fell in blinding sheets now. Ashley had constructed a makeshift shelter using her emergency tarp and fallen branches, creating a small protected space on the ledge. The mare's breathing had grown more labored, her body trembling with pain and cold. Ashley huddled beside the great horse, sharing what little warmth she could. The colt had nestled against his mother's other side, occasionally nickering, soft encouragement. "You're something special, aren't you?" Ashley whispered to the young horse. Her radio crackled through the storm's noise. "Carter, come in. This is Dr. Williams." Ashley fumbled for the device with numbed fingers. "Carter here. We've got Ethan Grant prepping emergency treatment." Helen Winslow thinks she knows about your foal. Helen Winslow, the historian. Yes, she asked about the foal's coloring. Ashley looked at the young horse. In the dim light, his white coat with gray patches seemed almost luminescent against the darkness. White with gray markings on his back, like shadows. There was a pause, then Helen's voice came through. Ashley listened carefully. That foal comes from a special bloodline. The Paiute called them Akayu Pakwi Mupisi, the White Soul Guardians. They appear only in times of great danger to the land. Under normal circumstances, Ashley would have dismissed such talk. But after what she'd witnessed today, the old woman's words resonated with an uncomfortable truth. The mare has a tracking chip, Ashley said, and injuries consistent with capture and escape. Someone's hunting them, Helen confirmed grimly. They've been trying to eliminate this bloodline for years. Why? Because they stand in the way of something valuable. More valuable than horses or land preservation. Helen's voice grew urgent. Ashley, you need to keep them alive until morning. Both of them. Especially the foal. The radio signal began to break up as the storm intensified. Helen, I need more information. Static overwhelmed the connection, then silence. Ashley was on her own. She turned her attention back to the injured mare. The splint she'd fashioned from branches and strips of her own thermal blanket was holding, but the horse needed real medical care soon. Hang in there, girl, she whispered. Help is coming in the morning. The colt watched her with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. As if understanding her words, he pressed his muzzle against her cold hand in what felt remarkably like gratitude. Ashley's thoughts drifted to Mason. He had loved horses, had talked about getting a place with enough land for a couple of rescue horses after retirement, a dream that died with him in the flames. The mare nickered softly in pain. Ashley refocused, pushing away memories that couldn't help her now. I won't let you die, she promised both horses. I won't fail you, too. Dawn broke with painful brightness, the storm having passed in the night. The world was transformed into a crystalline landscape of white, deceptively beautiful and deadly cold. Ashley awoke with a jolt. She had dozed off despite her best efforts to stay alert. Immediately, she checked the mare. The great horse's breathing was shallow but steady. The colt stood nearby, watching the trail below. Following his gaze, Ashley spotted movement. 3 figures were making their way up the slope. Here, she called, her voice hoarse from the cold. The first to crest the ridge was a man in his mid-30s carrying a large medical kit. His dark hair was partially hidden under a knit cap, his face weathered from outdoor work, but handsome in an understated way. Ashley Carter, he asked, his breath clouding in the frigid air. I'm Ethan Grant. Helen sent me. Behind him came Dr. Sarah Williams, the Forest Service's consulting veterinarian, and 2 rangers carrying a specialized animal transport sled. Ethan approached the injured mare, carefully murmuring in low, soothing tones. To Ashley's surprise, the horse didn't flinch away from him. Instead, she seemed to relax slightly, as though recognizing someone who could help. How is she? Ashley asked as Ethan examined the leg. She's strong, he replied, his voice gentle. But this break is severe. The good news is it's a clean fracture. Surgery could stabilize it. Dr. Williams joined the examination. I concur, but we need to move her now. Her body temperature is dangerously low. What about the colt? Ashley glanced at the young horse, who was watching the proceedings with unnerving focus. He'll follow his mother, Ethan said confidently. I've never seen a bond this strong. The process of moving the mare onto the transport sled was arduous and delicate. The horse was too weak to fight, but still weighed over 1,000 pounds. With careful coordination, they managed to secure her safely, ensuring her injured leg was protected. As predicted, the colt followed without hesitation, staying close to his mother throughout the difficult descent. Several times during particularly tricky sections, he seemed to be watching the human's technique, learning how they were protecting his mother. When they finally reached the waiting truck with its specialized horse trailer, Ashley felt the full weight of exhaustion hit her. She had been awake for over 30 hours fighting the elements and her own limits. Ethan noticed her faltering steps. You did something remarkable up there, he said quietly. Not many would have followed a wild horse into a blizzard. Ashley watched as they carefully loaded the mare into the trailer. I didn't do it for recognition. No, Ethan agreed. You did it because it was right? Something in his tone made Ashley look at him more closely. There was an intensity in his gaze that suggested he saw more in her actions than just doing her job. Where are you taking them? She asked. My ranch? I have the facilities for her surgery and recovery. Whispering Pines Ranch? I thought that was just for domesticated horses. Ethan smiled slightly. My grandfather started it that way. But I've been taking in wild horses for rehabilitation for years now. The colt had entered the trailer without prompting, positioning himself protectively near his mother. His eyes met Ashley's through the slats, and she felt that strange connection again. I'm coming with you, she decided. Dr. Williams overheard. Ashley, you need rest. You've been out all night in freezing conditions. I'm fine, she insisted. I need to see this through. What she didn't say, couldn't articulate, was the inexplicable bond she already felt with these horses, especially the colt. Something about his trust, his determination to save his mother had awakened emotions she had kept frozen for 3 years. Helen Winslow was waiting when they arrived at Whispering Pines Ranch. The elderly woman stood ramrod straight, despite her years, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her weathered face revealing little emotion. As the transport team rushed the mare into the surgery building, Helen approached Ashley. You've met them, she said without preamble. The Guardians. Ashley was too tired for mysticism. I met an injured mare and her foal who showed remarkable intelligence. Helen nodded, unperturbed by Ashley's skepticism. Come inside. There are things you need to understand while they work on Aurora. Aurora? The mare. That's her name in the ancient records. Too exhausted to argue, Ashley followed Helen into the ranch house. The interior was warm and smelled of pine and coffee, a welcome change from the biting cold outside. Helen moved to a large oak table covered with maps and open journals. The Mustangs of Clearwater Valley aren't just any wild horses, she began. They're direct descendants of the Spanish colonial horses, with bloodlines that go back 300 years. She pointed to photographs showing DNA test results and historical record. But there's more. The Paiute believes certain horses among them carry the spirits of the land's guardians. They appear only when the valley faces great danger. Ashley sank into a chair, the warmth of the room making her more aware of her bone-deep fatigue. Why are you telling me this? Helen's eyes were sharp with purpose. Because that foal shadow is the first of his kind, born in 7 years, the longest period without a guardian in recorded history. Despite her exhaustion, Ashley felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. How do you know his name? I don't, Helen admitted. But that's what you'll call him, isn't it? Because of the markings on his back. Ashley was silent. She had indeed thought of the name Shadow when she first saw the colt's unusual markings. Helen spread out a map of the valley. 3 years ago, Summit Enterprises began buying land around the valley perimeter. Nothing unusual, just normal development. But 6 months ago, they started erecting fences across federal land, illegally. She traced a pattern on the map. These fences have cut off the Mustangs' traditional migration routes, forcing them into more dangerous terrain. That's probably how Aurora was injured initially before someone captured her. Why would Summit care about wild horses? Ashley asked. That's what we need to find out, Helen replied. But first we need to ensure Aurora and Shadow survive. Because if the legends are true, their presence means this valley faces a threat greater than we realize. The door opened and Ethan entered, still wearing surgical scrubs. His expression was cautiously optimistic. The surgery went well, he announced. We've stabilized the fracture with a plate and screws. Dr. Williams is finishing up now. And Shadow, Ashley asked, the name slipping out naturally. The colt, he's remarkable. Hasn't made a sound, just watches everything we do with his mother. It's like he understands. Helen nodded as if this confirmed something important. He chose you, Ashley. Out of everyone in these mountains, he sought you out specifically. That's ridiculous, Ashley protested, though she couldn't deny the strange connection she felt. He was just trying to save his mother. Yes, Helen agreed. But why did he trust you to help wild horses fear humans instinctively? Ashley had no answer. The events of the past 24 hours defied her rational understanding of wildlife behavior. Ethan studied her with quiet intensity. You should get some rest. There's a guest room upstairs. Aurora will be sedated for hours and Shadow won't leave her side. Rest. Yes. Her body screamed for it. but her mind was whirling with questions that had no easy answers. "I'll show you," Helen offered, leading her toward the stairs. In the simple but comfortable guest room, Ashley sank onto the bed without even removing her boots. As exhaustion claimed her, her last conscious thought was of Shadow's intelligent eyes and the way he had trusted her without reason. For the first time in 3 years, Ashley slept without nightmares of fire and loss. Director Peterson paced his office at the Forest Service headquarters. The call he'd been dreading had finally come. "She found them, didn't she?" The voice on the phone was cool, controlled, but with an undercurrent of anger. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. The mare and the foal. They're at Whispering Pines Ranch now. You were supposed to keep your rangers away from the eastern sector." The accusation was clear. Peterson sank into his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 60 years. "Carter is independent-minded, and the storm accelerated faster than predicted." "Excuses? What do you want me to do?" "Nothing. We'll handle it from here." The line went dead. Peterson stared at the phone, then at the photograph on his desk, his son in a hospital bed smiling weakly after the experimental treatment that had saved his life. Treatment that Peterson could never have afforded on a government salary. The treatment that had cost him his integrity. He opened his drawer and pulled out a flask, taking a long swallow of whiskey. Then he picked up the phone again and dialed a number he rarely used. "It's Peterson," he said when the call connected. "We need to meet. It's about Ashley Carter." Ashley woke to the sound of a horse's soft nickering. For a moment she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then the events of the previous day rushed back. The storm, the injured mare, the colt who had led her through a blizzard. Shadow. She sat up, noting someone had removed her boots and covered her with a quilt while she slept. Sunlight streamed through the window, indicating she had slept through the rest of the day and into the following morning. The nickering came again this time, accompanied by a soft scratching at the door. Ashley crossed the room and opened it to find Shadow standing in the hallway, his intent gaze fixed on her. "How did you get in here?" she asked, startled. "He's remarkably good at opening unlatched doors," came Ethan's voice from the stairway. "And he's been waiting for you to wake up for the past hour." Shadow pawed at the wooden floor, then turned and walked a few steps down the hall, looking back at Ashley expectantly. "He wants you to follow him," Ethan explained, "to see Aurora." Ashley followed the colt down the stairs and out to the connected barn where specialized recovery stalls housed injured horses. Shadow led her directly to his mother's stall. Aurora was awake, her large eyes alert despite the pain she must be feeling. Her broken leg was heavily bandaged and supported by a specialized brace. When she saw Ashley, the mare let out a soft whicker of recognition. "She remembers you," Ethan said, appearing beside Ashley. "That's unusual for a wild horse." Ashley approached the stall carefully. "How is she?" "Better than expected. The surgery was successful and she's strong. But," he hesitated, "but what? She'll never run wild again. Not at full capacity. The damage was too severe. She might eventually walk and even trot on level ground, but she couldn't survive in the wild." Ashley felt a pang of sadness. For a wild Mustang, freedom to run was everything. Shadow moved between them, pressing his muzzle against Ashley's hand in what felt like consolation. "He's extraordinary," Ethan said, watching the interaction. "In 20 years working with horses, I've never seen a wild foal bond with a human like this, especially not one so young. Helen thinks he's special, part of some Paiute legend." Ethan's expression revealed nothing. "Helen knows more about these horses than anyone alive. I wouldn't dismiss her beliefs too quickly." Before Ashley could respond, the barn door opened, and Helen entered, followed by a tall, elderly Native American man whose dignified bearing commanded immediate respect. "Ashley," Helen said, "this is Thomas Redpath, chief of the local Paiute tribe, and—" she hesitated briefly, "an old friend." The older man nodded gravely. "Helen tells me you were the one chosen." "I wasn't chosen," Ashley corrected. "I just followed a foal who needed help for his mother." Thomas smiled slightly. "Is that not the definition of being chosen? The guardian sought you out, trusted you when trust does not come naturally to his kind." Shadow approached Thomas without fear, allowing the elderly man to place a hand on his head in what looked like a blessing. 7 years we have waited, Thomas said softly. 7 years since the last white guardian died without producing an heir. We feared the line was broken forever. Helen stepped forward. Show her, Thomas. From inside his jacket, Thomas withdrew an old photograph, its edges worn with handling. He handed it to Ashley. The image showed a much younger Thomas standing beside a white Mustang foal, with distinctive gray markings on its back, markings almost identical to Shadow's. That was taken in 1957, Thomas explained. The foal was called Mukua Stormbringer. He appeared the year before the mining companies tried to claim our sacred lands. Ashley studied the photograph, an unsettled feeling growing in her stomach. You're saying these horses appear before some kind of threat to the land? Not just any threat, Helen interjected. Existential threats. Ones that would fundamentally change the valley forever. Thomas nodded. The guardians are born with the memories of their ancestors. They know things other horses cannot know. They see things others cannot see. As if understanding he was the subject of conversation, Shadow moved to the center of their small circle, his intelligent eyes moving from face to face. This is difficult for me to accept, Ashley admitted. Understandable, Thomas said kindly. But ask yourself this, why did you follow him into the storm? You who by all accounts never breaks the rules. The question struck at something Ashley had been avoiding. Her decision to follow Shadow had been completely out of character, yet in that moment it had felt like the only possible choice. Before she could formulate a response, her phone rang, the Forest Service ringtone. She answered, grateful for the interruption. Carter. Director Peterson's voice came through. Where are you? Whispering Pines Ranch, sir, with the injured Mustang. I need you back at HQ immediately. Sir, I'm monitoring the mayor's recovery and... This isn't a request, Carter. Summit Enterprises has filed a complaint against you for trespassing on their development survey area. It's a serious allegation. Ashley felt her stomach drop. Survey area, I was on federal land, sir. Not according to their permits. My office 1 hour. The line went dead. Ashley looked up to find everyone watching her. It's starting, Helen said grimly. Sooner than we expected. The Summit Enterprises development office occupied the top floor of the only multi-story building in the nearby town of Pine Creek. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the mountains and valleys, the very land they sought to transform. In the corner office, Richard Blackwood studied the maps spread across his desk. At 68, he had built his empire from nothing, specializing in luxury developments in previously untouched natural settings. Clearwater Valley represented his final and greatest project. A knock at the door preceded the entrance of his executive assistant. Mr. Blackwood, the team from the Mineral Survey is here. Send them in. 2 men in business suits entered carrying tablets and folders. The older of the two spoke first. The preliminary results are confirmed, sir. The rare earth deposits under the eastern ridge are larger than we initially estimated. Conservative value is in the billions. Blackwood allowed himself a small smile. And the mineral rights, ready to be exercised as soon as the land reclassification goes through. Excellent. Blackwood turned to the window. What about our complication? The younger man cleared his throat nervously. The mare escaped during transport, but we've tracked her to Whispering Pines Ranch. The foal is with her, and the ranger who found them. Ashley Carter, former hotshot firefighter, lost her husband in the Yellowstone fires 3 years ago. By all accounts, she's strictly by the book. Unlikely to cause trouble without solid evidence. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. People change when they have something to protect. I want her contained. Use the trespassing allegation to keep her busy. Yes, sir. There's one more thing. The younger man hesitated. Ethan Grant is involved now. Blackwood went very still. My son is helping them. Yes, sir. He performed the surgery on the mare. A complex emotion crossed Blackwood's face, anger mixed with something almost like pride. Ethan has always had a soft spot for lost causes. Keep monitoring the situation. I want daily reports. After the men left, Blackwood remained at the window, his reflection ghostly against the backdrop of the mountains beyond. In those mountains lay a fortune that would cement his legacy. Nothing would stand in his way, not wild horses, not environmental concerns, not even his own son. He picked up his phone and dialed. It's time to accelerate the timeline. Begin phase 2 tonight. Ashley parked her truck outside Forest Service headquarters, her mind racing with questions. How could she have been trespassing? She knew the boundaries of the federal land like the back of her hand. As she walked toward the entrance, a familiar figure stepped out of the shadows of the parking lot. "Carter," Director Peterson said quietly, "walk with me." His tone was unusual enough that Ashley followed without question. Peterson led her away from the building toward a small park area where they couldn't be overheard. "Sir, about the trespassing allegations." "They're bogus," Peterson interrupted. "Summit knows exactly where the boundaries are. This is about intimidation." Ashley stared at him, confused by this frank admission. "Then why did you call me in?" Peterson looked older. Suddenly the lines in his face deeper. "Because I'm part of it. Have been for years." "I don't understand." "Almaikonom. 5 years ago, my son was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. The only treatment was experimental, not covered by insurance. $500,000. Peterson's voice was flat. "Summit Enterprises covered the costs. In exchange, I've been accommodating their interests." Ashley felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Peterson had been her mentor, the person she trusted most after Mason's death. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because they're afraid of you." "Anum," Peterson's eyes met hers directly. "You found something they've been trying to eliminate for years, the white foal, the guardian. You know about that." "Of course I know. The Paiute legends are old, but the horses are real, and they stand in the way of Summit's true goal, which is what rare earth minerals. There's a massive deposit under the eastern ridge, right along the Mustangs' migration route, worth billions. But they can't extract it while the area is protected habitat for an historically significant wild horse bloodline." Ashley felt cold anger replacing her shock. "So they've been deliberately eliminating the horses. That's illegal on multiple levels." Peterson nodded grimly. "The fences, the accidents, the selective culling of certain bloodlines, all designed to drive the herd away from the deposit area or reduce their numbers below the threshold for protection." "Why tell me this? Why now?" "Because I'm tired of being their puppet." Peterson rubbed his face wearily. "My son is healthy now, but at what cost? I've helped destroy something precious, something irreplaceable." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data drive. "Everything I know is on here. Records, emails, coordinates of the illegal fences. I'm going to the federal authorities tomorrow, but Summit has people everywhere. You need to protect those horses until I can get this information into the right hands." Ashley took the drive, her ranger's instinct to trust her superior, warring with the revelation of his betrayal. "How do I know this isn't another manipulation?" Peterson smiled sadly. "You don't, but Shadow trusted you. Maybe you can find it in yourself to trust your instincts too." Before Ashley could respond, the roar of an approaching vehicle caught their attention. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the parking lot. "They're here for your interview about the trespassing," Peterson said quickly. "Tell them whatever they want to hear. Buy time. Then get back to the ranch and stay with those horses." The SUV doors opened and two men in dark suits stepped out. "Carter," one called. "We need to speak with you." Peterson stepped away. "Remember, trust your instincts," he murmured, then walked toward the building, nodding to the men as he passed them. Ashley squared her shoulders and moved to meet them, her hand closing tightly around the data drive in her pocket. Whatever game Summit was playing, she was now a player, not a pawn, and she had a white guardian horse showing her the way. The interrogation lasted 3 hours. Ashley sat in the sterile conference room answering the same questions repeatedly, while two Summit representatives circled like predators seeking weakness. They showed her maps with altered boundary lines, permits, with questionable authorization stamps, and photographs of the ridge taken from misleading angles. She told them what they wanted to hear, that she'd made a mistake in the storm, that she'd accept whatever reprimand was deemed appropriate. All the while, the data drive felt like a burning coal in her pocket. When they finally released her, the sun was setting behind the mountains. Ashley drove directly back to Whispering Pines Ranch, constantly checking her rearview mirror for signs of being followed. The ranch buildings glowed with warm light against the gathering darkness. She parked beside Ethan's truck and hurried inside, finding Helen Thomas and Ethan gathered around the kitchen table. "They're escalating," she announced without preamble, placing Peterson's data drive on the table. "Summit knows about Shadow. They've been systematically eliminating the Guardians for years to clear the way for mineral extraction. Helen's face remained impassive, but her eyes flashed with vindication. We've suspected as much. Thomas picked up the drive. What is this evidence? From Director Peterson. He's been working with Summit, but he's turning on them now. Ashley hesitated. At least that's what he claims. Ethan's expression darkened. Can he be trusted? I don't know, Ashley admitted. But the information might help us protect the herd regardless of his motivations. They inserted the drive into Helen's laptop. The files contained exactly what Peterson had promised, detailed records of Summit's activities, including maps of the illegal fencing correspondence about managing the Mustang population, and geological surveys showing the extensive rare earth mineral deposits beneath the eastern ridge. This is huge, Ethan said, scanning through the documents. With this evidence, we could stop Summit completely. But we need to verify it, Ashley cautioned. If Peterson has been working with them for years, this could be misinformation to lead us astray. Thomas nodded in agreement. The most immediate concern is the herd. If Summit is accelerating their plans, the remaining Mustangs are in danger. A soft nickering from the doorway drew their attention. Shadow stood there, his intelligent eyes focused on Ashley. Since her return, he'd barely left her side except to check on his mother. He knows, Helen said quietly. The Guardians always know when danger approaches. Ashley would have dismissed such mysticism a day ago. Now looking into Shadow's eyes, she couldn't deny the intelligence, the awareness that seemed to transcend normal animal cognition. We need to check on the herd, she decided. See if they're still in their winter grounds or if they've been pushed into more dangerous terrain. I can take you at first light, Ethan offered. I know where they were last spotted. We should check on Aurora first, Ashley said, already moving toward the door. Shadow trotted ahead, leading her to the recovery barn. Inside, Aurora lay in her stall, awake but subdued. The mare lifted her head as Ashley approached, recognizing her. Hey, girl, Ashley said softly, entering the stall. How are you feeling? Aurora's large, expressive eyes regarded her with what seemed like gratitude. The injured leg was held off the ground, but the mare's overall condition appeared improved from the previous day. Ethan appeared beside her with a medical chart. Her vitals are stable, and the swelling around the fracture site is decreasing. She's responding well to treatment. Will she recover enough to... Ashley trailed off, not knowing exactly what outcome she was hoping for. To return to the wild. Ethan completed her thought. Not fully. She might eventually manage uneven terrain at slower speeds, but she'll never have the mobility needed for a wild existence. The injury was too severe. Shadow moved to his mother's side, gently pressing his muzzle against her neck. The mare nickered softly in response, a sound of such profound connection that Ashley felt like an intruder witnessing it. He hasn't left her side except to find you, Ethan observed. The bond is extraordinary. Ashley nodded, watching the horses communicate in their silent language. What will happen to them if we can't stop Summit, if the herd loses its protected status? Ethan's expression hardened. Mustangs without protection are often rounded up for auction. The lucky ones go to good homes. The others, he didn't need to finish. They both knew the grim reality for unwanted wild horses. That won't happen, Ashley said firmly. Not to them, not to any of the herd. She reached out cautiously to touch Aurora's neck. The mare allowed the contact, even leaning slightly into her hand, an astonishing level of trust from a wild horse. You should get some rest, Ethan suggested. If we're checking on the herd tomorrow, we'll need to leave early. Ashley nodded, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. The interrogation had drained her more than she realized. As she turned to leave, Shadow surprised her by leaving his mother's side for the first time since their arrival at the ranch. He wants to stay with you, Ethan said, his voice holding wonder. I've never seen anything like it. Ashley looked at the young horse, meeting his intelligent gaze. Is that what you want, to stay with me tonight? Shadow pawed at the ground, once the same signal he'd used to communicate with her in the forest. All right then, she conceded, feeling as though she was agreeing to something more significant than temporary companionship. In the guest room, Shadow settled onto the large rug beside her bed, curling his legs beneath him with casual grace. Ashley watched him from the edge of the bed, still marveling at the strangeness of having a wild horse voluntarily sharing her space. Your mother will be okay, she told him softly. We'll protect her. And your herd. Uff. Shadow's eyes, deep pools of awareness, held hers for a long moment before he sighed and lowered his head to rest. Ashley lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, too tired to change. As she drifted toward sleep, her thoughts turned to Mason. What would he make of all this? A wild Mustang colt treating her like a trusted friend, conspiracies involving mineral rights, and endangered horses, ancient Native American legends coming to life. For the first time, the memory of Mason didn't bring only pain. Instead, she could almost hear his voice. Follow your instincts, Ash. They've never led you wrong. She fell asleep to the soft, rhythmic breathing of Shadow beside her, a presence both strange and comforting in its unconditional trust. Ashley dreamed. She stood in a vast moonlit meadow, surrounded by mist that swirled like living silk around her legs. In the distance, a herd of white horses moved like ghosts across the landscape. Leading them was Shadow, but larger, fully grown. On his back rode a figure that Ashley somehow knew was herself, though she couldn't see the rider's face. The dream shifted. The meadow gave way to a burning forest. Smoke choked the air. The sound of trees cracking and falling filled her ears. Mason stood in the center of the inferno, reaching toward her, but between them was a wall of flame that neither could cross. It wasn't your fault, he called, his voice somehow clear despite the roaring fire. Let me go, Ash. I was always meant to stay in the flames. Before she could respond, the ground beneath her feet transformed again. Now she stood on the eastern ridge, but it was unrecognizable. The trees were gone, the soil torn open in massive wounds that exposed the earth's bones. Heavy machinery crawled like metal insects across the devastated landscape, and at the edge of this destruction stood Shadow alone and defiant, his white coat shining like a beacon against the ravaged land. Choose, came a voice from everywhere and nowhere. Choose what you will protect. Ashley woke with a gasp, heart pounding. The room was still dark, pre-dawn light, barely beginning to filter through the window. Shadow stood beside the bed, his muzzle gently nudging her shoulder. His eyes, reflecting the dim light, seemed to hold knowledge of her dream. Just a nightmare, she whispered, reaching out to stroke his neck. But it hadn't felt like just a nightmare. It had felt like a warning. They set out at first light, Ashley, Ethan, and Shadow. Helen and Thomas remained at the ranch to continue analyzing Peterson's data and coordinate with trusted contacts who might help their cause. Ethan drove his truck along forest roads, still partially covered with snow from the recent storm. Shadow rode in the specially designed horse compartment in the back, occasionally whickering when they passed certain landmarks. It's like he's recognizing places, Ashley observed after the third such instance. Ethan nodded. The Mustangs have specific migration routes they follow seasonally. He's probably identifying markers they use for navigation. Helen and Thomas would say he's remembering paths his ancestors took. Ashley said, testing Ethan's reaction. His expression remained neutral. Indigenous knowledge often contains truths that science hasn't caught up to yet. The Paiute have lived alongside these horses for generations. You believe the legend, then, about Shadow being a guardian? Ethan was silent for a moment, negotiating a particularly rough section of road before answering. I believe there are things we don't understand about the natural world, and I've worked with enough horses to recognize when one is different. They drove in companionable silence until they reached a vantage point overlooking one of the valleys where the Mustangs typically wintered. Ethan cut the engine and they exited the truck. Shadow immediately jumped down from his compartment, his nostrils flaring as he tested the air. Ashley raised her binoculars, scanning the valley floor. I don't see any movement. They should be here, Ethan said, frowning. This is their traditional winter grazing area. Shadow pawed at the ground, then looked toward the east away from the valley they were observing. He wants us to go that way, Ashley said. Ethan hesitated. That's toward the higher ridges. Dangerous terrain in winter, especially for foals and older horses. Shadow began walking eastward, stopping to look back at them expectantly. We should follow him, Ashley decided, already moving to collect her pack from the truck. Ethan's frown deepened. The roads don't go that way. We'd have to proceed on foot through some rough country. Then that's what we'll do. He studied her for a moment, then nodded, reaching into the truck for his own gear. You've changed since I last saw you, you know. What do you mean? Ashley asked, surprised. We barely knew each other before. I attended the memorial service. For Mason, Ethan's voice was gentle. You were like a statue then. Perfectly composed, not a crack showing. I remember thinking no one could possibly be that strong. The mention of Mason's memorial sent a familiar pain through Ashley's chest, but it was duller now, like an old wound that had finally begun to heal. I wasn't strong, she admitted. I was numb. There's a difference. And now, Ashley looked at Shadow, waiting patiently at the trail's beginning. Now I feel everything, and it hurts, but it's better than feeling nothing. Ethan's gaze held something that might have been admiration. Let's follow your colt then. See what he needs to show us. They hiked for nearly 2 hours following Shadow as he led them confidently across increasingly difficult terrain. The forest gradually thinned as they climbed higher, giving way to rocky outcroppings and expansive views of the surrounding mountains. Shadow moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to ensure they were still following, but never deviating from his chosen path. He knows exactly where he's going, Ethan observed as they crested yet another rise. Before Ashley could respond, Shadow stopped abruptly, his ears pricked forward. From somewhere ahead came the unmistakable sound of a horse's call, a high, clear neigh that echoed off the surrounding cliffs. Shadow answered immediately, his young voice carrying across the distance. Then he was moving again, faster now, with Ashley and Ethan hurrying to keep up. They emerged onto a small plateau and stopped in stunned silence. Below them, in a narrow canyon, was the missing Mustang herd. But they weren't grazing peacefully. They were trapped, hemmed in by steep walls on 3 sides, and what appeared to be newly erected fencing on the 4th. My God, Ethan whispered. They're corralled. Ashley quickly counted. At least 30 horses, including several foals and pregnant mares. Her voice hardened. This isn't their natural habit. Someone drove them here, deliberately. Shadow pawed at the ground, his agitation evident as he looked down at his trapped herd. A large dark stallion, clearly the herd's leader, had spotted them and was calling out, perhaps recognizing Shadow. We need to get down there, Ashley said, already searching for a path. Those horses need water and proper forage. This canyon has neither. Before they could move, the sound of engines echoed through the canyon. From around a bend came 2 ATVs carrying men in Summit Enterprises uniforms. Ashley and Ethan quickly pulled back from the edge, hiding themselves from view. They're monitoring the trap, Ethan whispered, probably waiting for the horses to weaken before attempting capture. This is illegal on so many levels, Ashley hissed. Federal land, protected species, unauthorized fencing. Shadow remained at the edge, watching the men below with unnerving focus. One of them pointed up toward their position, and Ashley quickly pulled the colt back into cover. They might have spotted us, she warned. We need to document this and get help. Ashley took out her phone, but there was no signal. Of course, she muttered. I know another way down, Ethan said suddenly. An old game trail that comes in from the west. The horses could escape that way if we remove a section of the fence. Shadow nickered softly, as if understanding the plan. Let's do it, Ashley decided. But we have to be careful. If those men work for Summit, they won't be happy about us interfering. They retreated from the plateau and circled around, following Ethan's lead toward the western approach to the canyon. The path was treacherous, a narrow trail along the canyon wall that dropped steeply to one side. This used to be part of the herd's migration route, Ethan explained quietly as they picked their way along. Before the new fencing cut them off from it, Shadow moved with surprising agility along the difficult trail, occasionally looking back to ensure they were still following. When they finally reached the bottom of the canyon, they could see the fence line in the distance, heavy-duty wildlife fencing that would be impossible for the horses to breach. We need to create an opening, Ashley said, examining the fence. But we have to be quick. Those Summit guys could come around at any moment. Ethan pulled wire cutters from his pack. I came prepared. As he began cutting through the fence, Ashley kept watch, her hand resting on Shadow's neck to keep him quiet and close. The trapped herd had sensed their presence, the stallion moving restlessly at the far end of the canyon. Almost there, Ethan whispered, cutting through the last of the wire to create an opening large enough for the horses to pass through. A sudden engine noise sent them ducking behind a large boulder. One of the ATVs rounded the corner, its driver slowly patrolling the fence line. Stay here, Ashley breathed, pressing herself flatter against the rock. If he spots the opening, we're caught. The ATV driver paused, looking at something in the distance, then continued his patrol away from their position. "Now," Ashley said when he was out of sight, "we need to guide the herd to the opening." Shadow was already moving, trotting confidently toward the main group of horses. The stallion approached, nostrils flared as he assessed this young intruder. "Will they hurt him?" Ashley asked worriedly. Ethan shook his head. "Watch." The stallion circled Shadow, who stood his ground with remarkable poise for such a young horse. There was a moment of tension, then the stallion softened, recognizing the colt as part of his herd. "Incredible," Ashley whispered. "It's like they're communicating." After this brief acknowledgement, Shadow turned and began walking toward the fence opening, looking back at the herd as he had done with Ashley in the forest. The stallion watched, then followed, bringing the entire herd with him. "It's working," Ethan breathed as the Mustangs began moving toward freedom. "He's leading them out." The escape was proceeding smoothly when the ATV's engine sound returned louder and closer. The driver had spotted the herd's movement and was racing back toward them. "Go!" Ashley shouted to Ethan. "Get the horses through. I'll distract him." Without waiting for a response, she sprinted away from the fence, deliberately making herself visible to the approaching ATV driver. He veered toward her, abandoning his path toward the escaping horses. "Hey!" the man shouted, skidding to a stop and jumping off his vehicle. "You're trespassing on Summit property. Itram. This is federal land." Ashley called back, keeping a safe distance between them. "And you've illegally trapped protected wildlife." The man advanced on her, his face twisted with anger. "You have no jurisdiction here. The company has permission for wildlife management." "Wildlife management?" Ashley scoffed. "You mean starving them into submission for easy capture?" From the corner of her eye, she could see the last of the Mustangs moving through the opening, Ethan guiding them with gentle gestures. Shadow remained at the rear, ensuring the entire herd made it to safety. The Summit employee noticed her distraction and turned, spotting the escaping horses. "Damn it!" He reached for a radio at his belt. Ashley moved swiftly, knocking the radio from his hand. "I don't think so." The man lunged at her. Ashley sidestepped, using her Forest Service training to avoid his grasp. But he was bigger, stronger, and managed to catch her arm on his second attempt. "You've just made a serious mistake," he growled, twisting her arm painfully behind her back. Before he could do more, a blur of white and gray slammed into him from the side. Shadow had returned, charging the man with enough force to knock him off balance and free Ashley. The man stumbled back, startled by the young horse's intervention. "What the hell?" Shadow positioned himself between Ashley and the man, ears back, teeth bared in a clear threat display. "I suggest you back off," Ashley advised, catching her breath. "He's made his position clear." The Summit employee glared at them both, but maintained his distance, clearly unnerved by the colt's protective behavior. He retrieved his radio from the ground. "This isn't over," he warned, backing toward his ATV. "Summit has plans for this valley that no amount of interference will stop." As he drove away, Ethan rejoined them. The herd is safely out. They're heading for the lower valley. He noticed Ashley rubbing her arm. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she assured him. "Thanks to Shadow." The colt had returned to his normal demeanor, the earlier aggression completely gone. He nudged Ashley's hand gently, as if checking that she was truly unharmed. "He protected you," Ethan said, wonder in his voice. "I've never seen a young horse, especially a wild one, deliberately confront a human threat like that." Ashley stroked Shadow's neck gratefully. "He's full of surprises." They made their way back to the truck using a different route, vigilant for any sign of Summit employees. When they finally reached the vehicle, Ethan checked his phone. Signals back, and 6 missed calls from Helen. His expression grew concerned as he listened to his voicemail. "We need to get back to the ranch immediately. There's been a development." "What kind of development?" Ashley asked, helping Shadow into his compartment. Ethan's face was grim. "Director Peterson is dead." The news swept through Ashley like a physical blow. "Dead how?" "Car accident, according to the official report," Ethan replied as they drove quickly back toward the ranch. "Hit a patch of black ice on Mountain Pass Road last night." "That's not possible," Ashley said, her voice hollow. "He's driven that road for 30 years, and he was supposed to take the evidence to the federal authorities today." "Exactly why Helen is concerned." "Oh." They completed the drive in tense silence, both aware of the implications. When they reached the ranch, Helen and Thomas were waiting in the main house. their expressions grave. It wasn't an accident, Helen confirmed without preamble. My contact at the sheriff's office says Peterson's brake lines were cut. Ashley sank into a chair, the reality of what they were facing suddenly crystallizing. They killed him because he was going to expose them. Thomas nodded solemnly. And they will not hesitate to eliminate others who stand in their way. Did Peterson manage to share the evidence with anyone else? Ethan asked. No, Helen replied. And his office was broken into last night. All his files, digital and physical, are gone. Which means the only copy of the evidence is the drive he gave me, Ashley realized. And Summit probably knows I have it. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They were now the only ones who knew the truth about Summit's activities, with only a single copy of the evidence to prove it. We should take this to the federal authorities immediately, Ethan suggested. Not yet, Helen cautioned. Peterson had connections in those agencies. We don't know who to trust. Then what do we do? Ashley asked. We need more evidence, Thomas said firmly. Something Summit can't erase or deny. Shadow, who had been standing quietly by the door, suddenly perked up his ears, swiveling toward the front of the house. A moment later, they all heard the sound of vehicles approaching. Helen moved to the window. Summit security vehicles. 3 of them. Ashley felt a surge of dread. They're coming for the evidence. And possibly the horses, Ethan added. Aurora and Shadow are living proof of their illegal activities. Ashley's mind raced. We need to move Aurora. She can't defend herself in her condition. The old hunting cabin, Helen suggested. On the north property, it's well hidden and accessible by the back trail. Ethan nodded. I'll prepare the trailer. Ashley helped me with Aurora. As they hurried toward the barn, the Summit vehicles pulled into the driveway. From the lead SUV emerged a tall, distinguished-looking man in his late 60s, his silver hair and tailored coat projecting authority and wealth. Ashley froze, recognition dawning. Is that Richard Blackwood? Ethan confirmed, his voice suddenly strained. CEO of Summit Enterprises. The older man surveyed the property with cold calculation before his gaze locked onto them. For a brief moment, his eyes met Ethan's, and something unspoken passed between them. You know him? Ashley asked, noticing the exchange. Ethan's face had gone rigid. He's my father. The revelation hit Ashley like a physical blow. Your father, but your last name. I used my mother's maiden name, Ethan explained tersely. I wanted to make my own way without his influence or reputation. Before Ashley could process this bombshell, Blackwood and 2 security personnel began walking toward them. Get to Aurora, Ethan said urgently. I'll delay them. Ethan, if he's your father, trust me, he insisted. Please. The intensity in his eyes convinced her. Ashley nodded and slipped into the barn shadow at her heels while Ethan moved to intercept the approaching men. Inside, she found Aurora alert and watching the door anxiously, as if sensing the tension outside. The mare struggled to rise when she saw Ashley, but her injured leg wouldn't support her weight. Easy, girl, Ashley soothed quickly, gathering what they would need for transport. We're going to move you somewhere safe. She could hear voices outside Ethan's, in the deeper tones of his father. Their conversation was muffled but clearly tense. Ashley worked swiftly, preparing Aurora for relocation. Shadow moved between the stall and the door, his agitation growing with each passing minute. When everything was ready, Ashley cracked the back door open, checking for a clear path to the trailer Ethan had positioned earlier. The route was empty, everyone's attention focused on the confrontation at the front of the barn. Now, she whispered to Shadow. We have to go now. Leading Aurora was a careful process. The mare could walk, but slowly and with obvious pain. Shadow stayed at his mother's side, offering support and encouragement with gentle nudges. They had almost reached the trailer when Ashley heard the conversation at the front of the barn escalate into shouting. Moments later, the back door burst open and Richard Blackwood emerged, flanked by his security team. Ms. Carter, he called, his voice pleasant despite the hardness in his eyes. I believe you have something that belongs to Summit Enterprises. Ashley positioned herself protectively between the horses and the approaching men. I don't know what you're talking about. The data drive Director Peterson gave you before his unfortunate accident. Blackwood clarified. Corporate property, I'm afraid. Taken without authorization. I don't have it, Ashley lied. The drive was actually hidden in Shadow's halter, secured in a small waterproof pocket she'd stitched there earlier. Blackwood sighed as if dealing with a recalcitrant child. "Search her," he ordered his men. Before they could move, Ethan appeared behind them, his face bloodied from what appeared to have been a physical altercation. "Don't touch her," he warned. "Or the horses." Blackwood turned to his son, disappointment etched in his features. "Ethan, always the crusader for lost causes. I had hoped you might finally embrace your heritage, your destiny with Summit. By helping you destroy the valley for profit," Ethan scoffed. "This isn't about progress or development. It's about greed, pure and simple." "It's about legacy," Blackwood corrected. "Something you've repeatedly rejected." The tension between father and son was palpable, years of conflict compressed into a single confrontation. "Ms. Carter," Blackwood said, turning back to Ashley, "I'm going to be clear. Summit Enterprises has legal permits for all our activities in this valley. The Bureau of Land Management has already approved the reclassification of the eastern sector. By this time next week, our mineral extraction operation will be fully authorized." "You can't reclassify protected habitat," Ashley challenged. "We can when the species in question is deemed no longer historically significant to the region." Blackwood's smile was cold. "Our research indicates the Clearwater Valley Mustangs are genetically indistinguishable from other wild horse populations. Their protected status is being revoked." The news hit Ashley like a physical blow. This was Summit's endgame, not just to drive the horses away, but to strip them of legal protection entirely. "That's a lie," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The Clearwater Mustangs have unique genetic markers documented by multiple studies." "Studies that are currently being reevaluated?" Blackwood replied smoothly. "Science is an evolving field, Ms. Carter. New findings supersede old beliefs." Ashley looked to Ethan, whose expression confirmed her worst fears. Summit was manipulating the system at every level, using their influence to rewrite scientific consensus to suit their needs. "Now," Blackwood continued, "I'll ask once more for the data drive. After that, my men will search you, the horses, and this entire property if necessary." Shadow moved forward, suddenly placing himself between Ashley and Blackwood. The young horse's posture was not aggressive, but unmistakably protective. Blackwood studied the colt with clinical interest. "The white foal, the supposed guardian of Paiute legend." He shook his head dismissively. "Superstition has no place in modern resource management." "This isn't about superstition," Ashley countered. "It's about preserving something irreplaceable. Once it's gone, no amount of money can bring it back." "Very poetic," Blackwood said dryly, "but ultimately irrelevant. Progress doesn't halt for sentiment." He nodded to his men, who began advancing toward Ashley and the horses. In that moment, Shadow did something extraordinary. He reared up his front hooves, pawing the air in a display that made Blackwood's security team stop in their tracks. When he returned to all fours, he pawed the ground 3 times, the same signal he had used with Ashley in the forest. Then he turned and began walking deliberately toward the north trail, away from the confrontation. Aurora, despite her injury, began following her foal, limping but determined. "They're leaving," Ethan said quietly, following Shadow. "Stop them," Blackwood ordered his men. "No," Ethan moved to block their path. "Enough, father. You've manipulated, threatened, and now committed murder. I won't let you harm these horses, too." "Murder, Peterson's death was an accident," Blackwood replied, though his eyes told a different story. "We both know better," Ethan said coldly. Ashley made her decision in that moment. "I'm going with the horses," she announced, already moving to follow Shadow and Aurora. "Whatever evidence I may or may not have, it's not here." Blackwood's face hardened. "This is your final warning, Ms. Carter. Summit Enterprises will not be thwarted by misguided environmentalism or Native American legends. The mineral rights alone are worth billions." "Some things are worth more than money," Ashley replied, continuing to back away. "Detain her," Blackwood ordered. Before his men could move, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. Helen had called the sheriff's department, and several patrol cars were pulling into the ranch's driveway. Blackwood's expression flickered with annoyance. "This isn't over," he warned. "Not by a long shot." Ashley turned and followed Shadow and Aurora, leaving Ethan to deal with the authorities. As she caught up to the horses on the north trail, Shadow looked back at her with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. I hope you know where we're going, she told him softly. The young horse nickered in response, continuing confidently along the path, as if he had traveled it many times before. Behind them, the confrontation at the ranch faded into the distance, but Ashley knew it was just the beginning of a larger battle. A battle for the soul of Clearwater Valley and the future of the guardians who protected it. The old hunting cabin stood in a small clearing, embraced by ancient pines that hid it from the casual observer. Built by Helen's father decades ago, its weathered timber had aged to match the surrounding forest. If you didn't know it was there, you'd likely walk right past it. Ashley guided Aurora inside the attached lean-to that served as a crude stable. Shadow followed his alert eyes, constantly scanning their surroundings. The mare settled onto the fresh straw. Ashley had quickly arranged her injured leg, carefully positioned for comfort. "We should be safe here for now," Ashley said, more to reassure herself than the horses. She checked her phone. No signal as expected. They were truly isolated. Outside, dusk was falling rapidly, the forest growing darker beneath the winter canopy. Ashley lit the cabin's old kerosene lamps, their warm glow transforming the single room into a haven against the gathering darkness. Shadow moved restlessly between his mother and the cabin door, his senses clearly detecting something Ashley couldn't perceive. "What is it?" she asked him, checking through the window for signs of pursuit. The young horse nickered softly, pawing once at the wooden floor. Not danger then, but something important. A soft knock at the door made Ashley freeze. She reached for the old hunting rifle mounted above the fireplace, checking that it was loaded. "Who's there?" she called, positioning herself protectively between the door and the horses. "It's me," came Ethan's voice. "And Helen." Ashley lowered the rifle and unbolted the door. Ethan entered first, carrying supplies, followed by Helen with a grim expression. "We weren't followed," Ethan assured her. "Dad's people are still dealing with the sheriff." "What happened?" Ashley asked, helping them unload food, medical supplies, and warm clothing. "Sheriff Thompson is an old friend," Helen explained. "She's keeping Summit occupied with questioning about Peterson's death. It won't hold them for long, but it buys us time." And Thomas. Meeting with the tribal council. The Paiute are preparing to file an emergency injunction based on religious and cultural significance of the land. Ethan moved to check on Aurora, his expertise as a veterinarian taking over as he examined her leg. "She's handling the move better than I expected." "Shadow helped," Ashley said, watching the colt hover protectively near his mother. "He kept her calm somehow." Helen nodded, unsurprised. "The Guardians have always had abilities beyond normal horses. The legends say they can share strength, even heal through their connection." Ashley would have dismissed such claims days ago. Now, after everything she'd witnessed, she found herself open to possibilities that defied rational explanation. "Blackwood said the BLM is reclassifying the land," she told them, "removing the Mustangs' protected status. How is that possible?" Helen's expression darkened. "Money opens many doors. Summit has been quietly placing their people in key positions for years. Peterson was just one example." "Can we stop it?" Ashley asked. "Perhaps," Helen replied. "With the evidence on that drive, and if we can demonstrate the cultural and historical significance of these horses." "There's something else," Ethan interjected, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Something I should have told you sooner." Ashley and Helen turned to him expectantly. "The mineral deposit Summit is after, it's not just rare earth elements. It's a specific combination found nowhere else in North America." He hesitated. "Essential components for next-generation defense systems. The Pentagon is involved." The implications settled over them like a physical weight. This wasn't just about a development company's greed. It was about national interests, military contracts, and power that extended far beyond Clearwater Valley. "How do you know this?" Ashley asked. "Because I was supposed to inherit it all," Ethan admitted. "Before I broke with my father, I was being groomed to take over Summit. I've seen the geological surveys, the military contracts, everything." "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Helen demanded. "Because I was ashamed," he said simply. "Ashamed that my family name was attached to something so destructive. That's why I changed it, why I became a veterinarian instead of a corporate executive." Shadow approached Ethan, studying him with those penetrating eyes. The young horse sniffed him carefully, then pushed his muzzle gently against Ethan's chest, a gesture of acceptance. He forgives you, Helen observed softly, even if you can't forgive yourself. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he stroked the colt's neck. I don't deserve it. None of us deserve forgiveness, Ashley said quietly. That's what makes it valuable. The moment of connection was broken by Aurora's soft whicker of pain. Ethan immediately returned to her side, administering medication from his supplies. What's our next move? Ashley asked Helen, watching Ethan work. The older woman spread a map on the cabin's small table. The land reclassification hearing is in 2 days. We need to present our evidence before then. But who can we trust? Ashley questioned. Summit has people everywhere according to your own assessment. Not everywhere, Helen corrected. There's a federal judge in Carson City, Judge Evelyn Martinez. She specialized in indigenous land rights before her appointment. Thomas knows her personally. Can she help us with just 2 days' notice? She can issue an emergency stay if we present compelling evidence. Helen pointed to specific locations on the map. But first we need to document the current state of the herd and the illegal fencing, physical proof to corroborate Peterson's data. Ashley nodded determination, hardening her resolve. I'll go at first light. Not alone, Ethan said, rejoining them. Aurora is stable, but I don't like leaving her. I'll stay with her, Helen offered. I know enough about horses to monitor her condition and call you if anything changes. What about Shadow? Ashley asked, glancing at the colt, who seemed to be following their conversation with unnerving comprehension. He goes with you, Helen said firmly. The guardian must witness what threatens his herd. They left before dawn, Shadow leading them along hidden trails that even Ethan, with his lifetime knowledge of the area, hadn't known existed. It's incredible, he murmured as the colt navigated a particularly difficult section. It's like he has a map in his head of every path in these mountains. Helen would say he inherited the memories of his ancestors. Ashley replied, finding herself increasingly open to such possibilities. And what would you say? Ethan asked. She considered the question. I'd say we don't understand everything about how animals perceive the world. Maybe what looks like mysticism to us is just a form of knowledge we can't comprehend. They continued in companionable silence until they reached a ridge overlooking the eastern valley. Below them, heavy machinery had already begun clearing land, bulldozers and excavators carving wounds into the earth. They're not waiting for official approval, Ashley noted, grimly documenting the destruction with her camera. They never intended to, Ethan confirmed. The paperwork is just for show. Dad always believed it's easier to apologize than ask permission. Shadow stood at the edge of the ridge, watching the machines with visible distress. His ears lay flat against his head, his body tense with an emotion that seemed remarkably human grief. He understands what's happening, Ashley said softly. Yes, Ethan agreed. I think he does. They continued their documentation following Shadow as he led them to multiple locations where Summit had erected illegal fencing, cutting off the Mustangs' traditional routes. At each site, Ashley collected GPS coordinates and photographic evidence. By midday, they had compiled an extensive record of Summit's violations. As they were preparing to move to their final location, the sound of approaching vehicles reached them. Summit security, Ethan warned, recognizing the distinctive black SUVs in the distance. They retreated into the cover of the trees. Shadow moving silently despite his white coloration that should have made him conspicuous. They're searching systematically, Ashley observed as more vehicles appeared on different access roads. They know we're out here. We need to split up, Ethan decided. I'll lead them away while you take Shadow and head back to the cabin. Ashley shook her head. Too dangerous. They know your connection to me now. Trust me, he insisted. I know how my father operates. His men won't harm me. He still hopes I'll come around to his side eventually. Before Ashley could protest further, Shadow nudged her urgently, clearly, eager to move in a different direction. He knows another way, she realized. Ethan nodded, his decision made. Go with him. I'll meet you back at the cabin by nightfall. He handed her his backup drive containing copies of all their evidence. Just in case. The weight of the small device in her palm felt disproportionate to its size. So many lives and an entire ecosystem depended on the data it contained. Be careful, she said, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. You too. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. Then he was gone, crashing deliberately through the underbrush to draw attention away from her position. Ashley turned to Shadow. Okay, show me the way. The colt led her through terrain that seemed impassable, narrow game trails, dense thickets, and once remarkably through a series of small caves that created a hidden passage beneath a ridgeline. They emerged hours later near a section of the valley Ashley didn't recognize. Shadow paused, testing the air with flared nostrils, then changed direction abruptly. What is it? Ashley asked, following his lead. The answer became apparent as they crested a small rise. Below them in a sheltered meadow was the Mustang herd, not trapped this time, but grazing freely, though with obvious vigilance. The powerful black stallion, the herd's leader, lifted his head at their approach, recognizing Shadow instantly. He called out a greeting that echoed across the valley. Shadow responded, then looked back at Ashley as if asking permission. Go, she encouraged him. Say hello to your family. Shiduom. The colt trotted down the slope, approaching the herd with a confidence that belied his youth. The stallion met him halfway, and the two touched noses in greeting. Ashley watched from a respectful distance, documenting the herd's condition with her camera. Their coats were duller than they should be, ribs showing through on some of the older members, clear signs of nutritional stress from being forced into unfamiliar territory. Shadow moved among them, receiving gentle acknowledgments from various horses. Then, surprisingly, he turned and began leading a small group back toward Ashley. What are you doing? She whispered as the colt approached with 3 mares and their foals in tow. Shadow stopped a few yards away, looking at her expectantly. The other horses regarded her with cautious curiosity rather than their usual fear. Understanding dawned. You're showing them I can be trusted. It was an extraordinary moment, a wild horse actively building a bridge of trust between human and herd. Ashley remained perfectly still, allowing the horses to approach at their own pace. One of the mares, older than the others, stepped forward. She was visibly pregnant, her sides swollen with new life, yet her condition was concerning, too thin for a horse carrying a foal. Shadow nickered softly, seemingly encouraging Ashley to help. She needs food, Ashley murmured. Better nutrition than she can find here. From her pack, she slowly withdrew a handful of the specialized feed Ethan had included for emergencies. She held it out palm flat, not approaching, but allowing the mare to make her choice. After a moment's hesitation, the mare stepped forward and delicately ate from Ashley's hand. It was an act of trust so profound that Ashley felt her eyes filling with tears. One by one, the other horses followed suit, accepting the small offering, not just of food, but of human assistance. Shadow stood by his demeanor, that of a facilitator, a bridge between worlds. When the feed was gone, the pregnant mare turned back toward the main herd, but not before gently pushing her muzzle against Ashley's shoulder, a gesture of gratitude that transcended species. Shadow remained watching as the small group rejoined the larger herd. That was incredible, Ashley told him. You're teaching them to trust humans again. The colt pawed the ground once, as if confirming her understanding. We should continue, she said, checking the time. There's one more location we need to document. Shadow led her onward, occasionally checking back to ensure she was following. The sun was beginning its descent when they reached their final destination, a high ridge overlooking what had once been pristine forest, but was now scarred by preliminary excavation. As Ashley documented the destruction, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. A sleek black aircraft bearing the Summit logo appeared over the ridge, hovering briefly before beginning a search pattern. They're not giving up, she muttered, pulling Shadow deeper into the cover of the trees. The helicopter circled closer, its searchlight sweeping the terrain as dusk approached. Ashley and Shadow remained motionless in the shadow of a large boulder, barely breathing, as the light passed within feet of their position. Finally, the helicopter moved off to continue its search elsewhere. Ashley released the breath she'd been holding. That was too close, she whispered to Shadow. We need to get back to the cabin. The return journey was tense, their path continually adjusted to avoid Summit security teams now combing the forest. Shadow's instincts proved unerring. Several times he altered their route moments before a security patrol appeared where they would have been. Night had fully fallen by the time the cabin's outline became visible through the trees. Ashley approached cautiously, alert for any sign of an ambush. The soft glow of lamplight warmed the windows. Inside, she could make out Helen's silhouette moving near Aurora's makeshift stall. But there was no sign of Ethan. Ashley's concern grew as she entered the cabin. Ethan hasn't returned. Helen shook her head, her weathered face tight with worry. No, and there's been increased activity on the radio. Summit Security has been coordinating search patterns for hours. He was supposed to lead them away, then circle back, Ashley said, fear creeping into her voice. Something must have gone wrong. Helen checked her watch. It's been almost 10 hours. Shadow, after checking on his mother, returned to the cabin door, pawing at it urgently. He wants to go back out, Ashley realized. To find Ethan. Helen considered this. The Guardian senses things we cannot. If anyone can find him, it's too dangerous, Ashley protested, even as she recognized the truth in Helen's words. More dangerous to wait, the older woman countered. Summit is accelerating their timeline. According to Thomas, they've pushed the reclassification hearing up to tomorrow morning. Ashley's stomach dropped. Tomorrow, that doesn't give us time to prepare our case properly. Exactly their intention. Helen's expression hardened. They know we have evidence. They're trying to outmaneuver us. Shadow continued his insistent pawing at the door. What about Aurora? Ashley asked. She's stable, Helen assured her. I can manage her care until you return. Decision made. Ashley quickly repacked her essentials. If we're not back by dawn, take the evidence to Judge Martinez yourself, Ashley finished. No matter what happens to us. Helen nodded grimly. The valley comes first. The herd comes first. The herd comes first. Ashley echoed, finding strength in the simple truth of those words. She opened the door and Shadow bolted into the night, pausing only long enough to ensure she was following. As they disappeared into the darkness, Helen watched from the doorway, her lined face reflecting both fear and fierce pride. May the ancestors guide them, she whispered to the silent forest. Shadow moved through the night forest with supernatural confidence, his white coat occasionally visible in the moonlight that filtered through the canopy. Ashley followed closely, trusting the colt's instincts more completely than she would have believed possible a week ago. They traveled for nearly an hour, following a route that seemed intentionally circuitous, avoiding patrols, surveillance equipment, and open areas where they might be spotted from the air. Finally, Shadow slowed, approaching a steep ravine with extreme caution. He pawed the ground once, then lowered his head in a clear signal to proceed quietly. Ashley crept forward, peering over the edge of the ravine. Below, illuminated by portable floodlights, was a Summit Enterprises mobile command center, several vehicles, equipment, and a dozen armed security personnel. And in the center, seated on a camp chair with his hands bound, was Ethan. Richard Blackwood stood before his son, speaking in tones too low for Ashley to hear. Ethan's responses, though inaudible, were clearly defiant, judging by his father's increasingly frustrated gestures. We need to get closer, Ashley whispered to Shadow. Find a way to hear what they're saying. The colt led her along the rim of the ravine to a point where a fallen tree created a natural bridge across the gap. With extreme caution, they crossed, then descended to a position behind a cluster of boulders, close enough to hear the conversation. Being unreasonable, Blackwood was saying. The valley's resources will be developed with or without your cooperation. Why sacrifice your future for a hopeless cause? Because some things matter more than profit, Ethan replied, his voice steady despite his captivity. The Mustangs, the ecosystem, the Paiute heritage, they're irreplaceable. Blackwood scoffed. Sentimentality. Horses can be relocated, ecosystems adapt, and native traditions have always given way to progress. Is that what you call it? Progress? Ethan's disgust was palpable. Destroying something pure and wild to feed corporate greed? Enough, Blackwood snapped. I've tried to be patient to help you see reason, but my patience has limits. He turned to one of his security team. Prepare to move out. The hearing is at 9 a.m., and I want this situation resolved before then. What about him? The guard asked, nodding toward Ethan. Blackwood studied his son with cold calculation. Keep him secured until after the hearing. Once the reclassification is approved, his objections become irrelevant. He moved closer to Ethan, lowering his voice. One last chance, son. Tell me where the Carter woman is hiding with the evidence, and I'll make you full partner in the operation. 20% ownership. Ethan laughed bitterly. You still don't understand. This isn't about money or position. It's about protecting something that matters. The only things that matter are the things that last, Blackwood replied. Companies, legacies, power. Your horses and forests will be gone in a century, regardless of what we do here. And what will be left in their place? Ethan challenged. More wealth for people who already have too much. More scars on the earth that never heal. What kind of legacy is that? Blackwood's expression hardened. My legacy, the one you've rejected. He nodded to the guards. Watch him carefully. We move out in 30 minutes. As he walked away, Ashley's mind raced. 30 minutes to formulate a rescue plan, and they were outnumbered and outgunned. Shadow nickered softly, drawing her attention. The colt was looking back up the ravine toward the forest beyond. He pawed the ground 3 times his signal. You have an idea, Ashley whispered. Shadow turned and began moving quietly away from the command center, clearly expecting her to follow. After a moment's hesitation, Ashley complied, trusting the colt's instincts. They climbed back to the forest above where Shadow immediately set off at a brisk pace. Within minutes, they reached a small clearing, and Ashley understood. The Mustang herd was there, the black stallion standing alert at its center. Shadow approached his herd leader, and the two engaged in what could only be described as communication. A series of soft sounds, ear movements, and body language too subtle for human interpretation. After this brief exchange, the stallion raised his head and let out a powerful call that echoed through the night. The herd previously resting rose as one. What are you doing? Ashley whispered, though she was beginning to understand. Shadow returned to her side, pawing the ground urgently. You're going to create a distraction, she realized. Using the herd. The colt nickered in what sounded remarkably like agreement. It's risky, Ashley cautioned. They have weapons. Shadow's response was to turn toward the ravine, clearly ready to proceed with his plan, regardless of her concerns. All right, she conceded, but I need to get into position first. They worked out a rudimentary coordination. Ashley would circle back to the command center, positioning herself to reach Ethan during the distraction. Shadow and the herd would approach from the opposite direction, creating chaos that would draw away the security team. 20 minutes, Ashley told him, checking her watch. Then bring the storm. Shadow pawed once in acknowledgement, then rejoined the herd, which was now grouped in formation behind the stallion, awaiting direction. Ashley moved quickly through the forest, circling around to approach the command center from behind the vehicles. She positioned herself behind a stack of equipment crates close enough to see Ethan, but still concealed from the guards. The security team was busy preparing for departure, loading gear and checking weapons. Ethan remained seated, his hands bound before him, his expression resolute despite his situation. Ashley checked her watch. 18 minutes had passed. As if on cue, a sound like rolling thunder filled the night, the rhythmic pounding of dozens of hooves approaching rapidly from the darkness. The security team reacted immediately, reaching for weapons and shouting warnings. Blackwood emerged from the command vehicle, demanding information. What the hell is that? He shouted as the sound grew louder. His answer came in the form of 30 Mustangs bursting from the tree line, led by the black stallion with Shadow at his side. The horses charged directly toward the command center, a coordinated wave of muscle and determination. The security team scattered some firing warning shots into the air that only served to add to the chaos. Vehicles were abandoned as men ran for cover. In the confusion, Ashley darted from her hiding place to Ethan, using a pocket knife to cut his bonds. Ashley, he exclaimed. What are you? No time, she interrupted, pulling him to his feet. Shadow brought reinforcements. The horses had surrounded the command center, running circles around the equipment and vehicles, effectively trapping the security team in a constantly moving perimeter of thundering hooves. At the center of this equine hurricane, Shadow and the stallion worked in perfect coordination, directing the herd's movements with uncanny precision. It's incredible, Ethan breathed, watching the spectacle as Ashley led him toward their escape route. Shadow orchestrated the whole thing, she told him, still hardly believing it herself. Blackwood, seeing their escape attempt, pushed past his cowering security team. Stop them, he ordered, but no one moved, too intimidated by the circling horses to intervene. Taking matters into his own hands, Blackwood drew a handgun and aimed it directly at Shadow. No, Ashley shouted, breaking into a run toward the colt. Time seemed to slow. Shadow, sensing the danger, turned to face Blackwood directly. The young horse showed no fear, only a serene determination, as he stared down the man who threatened everything he protected. As Blackwood's finger tightened on the trigger, the black stallion appeared, suddenly positioning himself between Shadow and the weapon. His message was clear: to harm the Guardian, Blackwood would have to go through him first. Then, remarkably, more horses broke from their circular pattern, forming a protective wall around Shadow. One by one, they positioned themselves as living shields. The pregnant mare Ashley had fed earlier, several other mothers with foals, the eldest members of the herd. The display stunned everyone, including Blackwood, whose hand wavered. "You see," Ethan said to his father, approaching slowly, "this is what you're destroying. Not just animals, but a community, a family willing to die for each other." Blackwood's expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time. "They're just horses." "I know," Ethan countered. "They're the soul of this valley, the living embodiment of what makes this land special." In that moment of distraction, Shadow darted forward, knocking the gun from Blackwood's hand with a precise movement of his head. The weapon skittered across the ground, disappearing beneath one of the vehicles. Blackwood staggered back, shock replacing his usual control. "That's not possible." "Many things are possible that we don't understand," Ashley said, joining Ethan. "The question is whether we choose to destroy them out of fear and greed or protect them out of wisdom and respect." The standoff held for several tense seconds, then Blackwood's radio crackled with an urgent message. "Sir, federal agents are at the main site. They have warrants and court orders to halt all operations immediately." "What?" Blackwood grabbed the radio. "On whose authority?" "Judge Martinez, sir. They're citing evidence of illegal activities and cultural heritage violations." Ashley and Ethan exchanged surprised glances. "Helen and Thomas," Ethan realized. "They must have gotten the evidence to the judge already." Blackwood's face contorted with fury, then settled into a cold mask of calculation. "This isn't over," he warned them. "Legal challenges can take years. Appeals, countersuits, regulatory reviews. Summit has the resources to fight indefinitely." "Perhaps," came a new voice from the darkness. Thomas Redpath emerged from the trees, accompanied by several other Paiute elders, and most surprisingly, Sheriff Thompson. "But your investors might not have the patience," Thomas continued, "especially when they learn about the federal investigation into your involvement in Director Peterson's death." Sheriff Thompson stepped forward. "Richard Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, environmental violations, and trespassing on federal land." As the sheriff recited his rights, Blackwood's empire of certainty crumbled visibly around him. He said nothing as he was handcuffed and led to a patrol car, but the look he gave Ethan contained a lifetime of complex emotions: anger, betrayal, and perhaps buried beneath it all, a grudging respect. The Mustangs, their diversion complete, had regrouped at the edge of the clearing. Shadow stood with them, watching the proceedings with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. "How did you find us?" Ashley asked Thomas. The elderly man smiled. "We didn't. Helen received your evidence and took it directly to Judge Martinez. The rest," he gestured toward the horses, "was the Guardian's doing." "Will it be enough?" Ethan questioned. "To stop the development permanently?" "The injunction is temporary," Thomas admitted. "But with the evidence you gathered, Peterson's data, and the federal investigation into Summit's methods, we have a fighting chance." He turned to Shadow, offering a small bow of respect. "The Guardian has done his part. Now we must do ours." 3 months later, the eastern meadows of Clearwater Valley burst with spring wildflowers. Ashley stood on the observation deck of the newly established Mustang Heritage Center, watching through binoculars as the herd grazed peacefully below. Summit Enterprises' development plans had been permanently halted by a combination of legal action, public outcry, and federal intervention. Richard Blackwood faced multiple charges, his empire crumbling, as investigations revealed the full extent of his illegal activities. The Clearwater Valley Mustangs had been granted enhanced protection under both environmental law and cultural heritage statutes, their genetic uniqueness and historical significance finally recognized officially. A sound of labored movement drew Ashley's attention. Aurora approached slowly along the gentle path, her gait still uneven, but steadily improving. The mare had made remarkable progress, defying veterinary expectations with her determination to recover. Beside her walked Helen, who had become Aurora's primary caretaker at the sanctuary portion of the center. The older woman's knowledge of the Mustangs, combined with her fierce dedication to their welfare, made her the perfect guardian for horses too injured to return to the wild. She walked the entire North Loop today, Helen reported proudly as she reached Ashley. Nearly 2 miles. She's a fighter, Ashley replied, stroking the mare's neck affectionately. Like her son, Helen agreed, gazing out at the valley. Shadow had returned to the wild after the confrontation with Summit, rejoining the herd as a junior member, but with a status that defied his age. Even the stallion deferred to him in certain situations, particularly when threats approached their territory. Any sign of him today? Helen asked. Ashley smiled. Western Ridge about an hour ago. He's leading a small group of yearlings, teaching them the boundaries, I think. Shadow's role had evolved in ways that fascinated the researchers now studying the herd. He functioned as both protector and teacher, seemingly passing on his unique knowledge to the younger generation. Ms. Carter, Ashley turned to find Ethan approaching, clipboard in hand. Since taking over as lead veterinarian for the Heritage Center, he had thrown himself into research on the Mustang's unique genetics and behavior patterns. The new foals are doing well, he reported. 3 born this week alone, including one from the pregnant mare Shadow brought to you in the forest. Any white ones? Helen asked immediately. Ethan shook his head. Not yet, but Thomas says the guardians appear when needed. With the valley protected now, they can rest, Ashley finished, until they're needed again. The 3 stood in companionable silence, watching the herd move across the landscape their ancestors had traveled for centuries. The battle for Clearwater Valley had changed them all, healing wounds both visible and hidden. Judge Martinez is coming tomorrow, Ethan mentioned after a while, to see what her injunction accomplished. I'll give her the full tour, Helen said. Show her exactly what was saved. The movement on the distant ridge caught Ashley's eye. Shadow stood silhouetted against the sky, his white coat luminous in the afternoon sun. As if sensing her gaze, he lifted his head in her direction. I'm going to hike up there, Ashley decided suddenly. Say hello. Ethan smiled knowingly. He still comes when you call. Not every time, she corrected. He has his own life now, his own purpose. But sometimes the boundaries between us become thin, Helen finished. As they should be. Ashley set off along the trail that would lead her to Shadow's viewpoint. As she walked, she reflected on the changes within herself, the frozen grief that had finally thawed, allowing her to feel again, to connect again. Mason would always be part of her, a wound that had scarred over but never completely vanished. Yet now she carried that scar not as a burden, but as a reminder of love once had and the capacity to love again. When she reached the ridge, Shadow was waiting, his intelligent eyes reflecting recognition and welcome. He approached without hesitation, allowing her to rest her hand on his neck in greeting. Hey there, guardian, she said softly, watching over everyone as usual. Shadow nickered softly in response, then turned to gaze out over the valley, his valley now safe from the machines that would have torn it apart. Standing beside him, Ashley felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, on the boundary between the human world and the wild, helping to protect the balance between them. Not every wound needs to be healed, she said, echoing the wisdom Helen had shared. Some wounds should be left as reminders that we were brave enough to survive them. Shadow pressed his muzzle gently against her hand, as if confirming her words. Then, with a soft whicker of farewell, he turned and began making his way back down toward his waiting herd. Ashley remained on the ridge, watching as Shadow rejoined the other horses. They moved as one across the valley floor, a living embodiment of the freedom that existed not as something granted by human permission, but as an elemental right of all wild things. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across Clearwater Valley, Ashley whispered a promise to the land and its guardians. Some boundaries were never meant to be crossed. I'll help keep them strong. In the distance, Shadow raised his head as if hearing her words, his white coat catching the fading light like a beacon against the gathering dusk. A promise returned from one guardian to another to protect the wild boundaries that kept them all whole.